Today, we're looking at a blue ink by Thornton's Blue. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. There's timestamps down below so that you can skip around, but if you got the time, I would appreciate if you check out the entire video. Also, if you're interested, you can check me out over on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen inks, I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Tasha Spectrum with a music nib, wrote with it for a day, and used it to take the notes for this video. This first writing sample is done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper in order to have some kind of standardization to look at. There's additional writing samples later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in cartridge form and had to decant it into a vial like this. Thought we weren't going to have one on here, huh? To keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no real shading. The extra fine is about the same tone, a little bit lighter perhaps than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, some very nice shading throughout here. 9 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine with some feather spread, with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, a little bit of shading. It still has some nice shading and not as much shading as the extra fine, but it's still there. 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows some color variation. The medium shows none, although we do get some in both of the writings. Tomoe River. No bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is just a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 14 seconds to dry. Medium is just a hair darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 19 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, and there was none. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, spots of shading. Spots that are just a little bit darker like the B in Blue or the TH in Thornton's. Extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have a light peppering in a few spots of some shading with 9 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine, about the same tone as the stub. With no feather spread, halo sheen, it does offer shading, not within the writing. But look at the word, that made no sense. Look at the word quick, it's a very dark. Look at the word fox, it's light to dark. The word brown is nowhere near as dark as the word quick. So it's definitely there, just not so pronounced. 13 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine shows color variation, the medium shows none, but we do get it in both. I agree with Vita. I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is it does immediately try and form a line at the bottom, but basically it's pushing up. So if it was hit wet right away, it's going to run from that water. Now when I let that filter paper dry for 10 minutes before I put it into water, we see a very blue line on the bottom. It's really started to bond quite quickly, but some of that ink is still pushing up. The suspense on what it's going to do is just huge. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I feel perfectly safe using this in a note-taking situation. It didn't have any kind of bad reaction. And water, that blue that stayed in the second filter paper, stayed here. The blue that moved, moved here. The water was not enough to get it out of my pen. I did need just a little bit more. I needed to use pen flush. Now, pen flush you see here is breaking down this ink. It's showing a lot of the white of the paper coming through. Pen flush is all that I needed to get it out of my pen, and that's all that you should need to get it out of yours. 1/3 bleach solution did completely remove it from the paper, but you shouldn't need that to clean your pen. I test viscosity or flow with a tilt test that I'll link the video on how I do that. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Thornton's Blue has a viscosity of 1.71, making this a wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples, and for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Thornton's Blue has an average dry time of 13 seconds, making it normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Thornton's Blue, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I wanted a nice orange, and I chose Diamine Autumn Oak. The second writing sample is done on TWSBI and moleskin paper. Here we're looking at TWSBI notebook paper. Now we get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is a little bit lighter, just a hair lighter, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 7 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no real color variation, and we're not getting it in the writing. And Moleskine. Now again, people like to really bash this paper, and I used to also. But then I decided what was more important than bashing a paper is let's find inks that work well with it. Now we do get bleeding that occurs. We do get show through that occurs. None of this bleeding touches the page underneath, which is good because again, this is a top flip reporter style notebook. They go this way, not this way. It's just a personal preference for me, but how does it write? Well, the medium at the top has a ton of feathering all over it. It has no spread, halo sheen, no shade. You can read everything that's there. It's a little distracting, but it's not the end of the world for a pocket-sized notebook. Extra fine is a little bit lighter than the medium. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade, 4 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows some color variation, but it's really not there. But come back and look at how it did when it came to, on the extra fine, when it came to the bleeding and ghosting. Very minor ghosting, very minor bleeding. It's nowhere near coming through the page. So in reality, this does pretty good on this paper, considering. That is all that I have for writing samples. So what do I think of Thornton's Blue? It tends to write quite a bit darker than we see in the swatch as a color. It's a very inexpensive ink. It was kind of a sleeper. As a standard blue, I could see why someone would use it. It's just going to drown in the sea of blue inks, and I hope that Thornton's can somehow manage to get their name out a little bit on some of the inks because I think they are a very good value for what you get. What nib and pen are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? Well, to get your brightest blue, you really want to use a very wet fine or very wet medium pen. It looks very pleasing that way. I do new ink reviews every single day, so if you're new here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.